Welcome back to ScholarScoop. I'm Steve Loflin. From an early age, today's guest thought she knew exactly what she wanted to do, but over time, that vision drastically changed. So what happens when a young musician dreaming of conducting a symphony ends up as a sought-after advisor to university presidents and corporate leaders? Today, I'm sitting down with my longtime friend, Dr. Julie Staggs, whose career proves your college journey is about so much more than your major. Julie's story is a masterclass in embracing unexpected paths. From her early days at a women's college to serving on its board of trustees to navigating complex leadership roles in corporate America and higher education, Julie offers invaluable insights every student, parent, and educator should hear. We'll talk about how her liberal arts education became the foundation for a lifetime of learning, leadership, and reinvention. Buckle up. This conversation might just change how you think about college, careers, and the power of staying curious. Let's get some ScholarScoop from Julie. Hey there, Julie. Thank you so much for jumping on for a little ScholarScoop. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's a pleasure to be with you for ScholarScoop.
Well, I always love talking to you. And I was thinking about it when I was sort of putting my head around what will Julie and I talk about on a ScholarScoop session. And I can tell you so far in this ScholarScoop journey, you are the person who I have known the longest. We go back decades. I don't know if you've counted up the decades, which we don't have to do that right now. But one of the things about that I think is something interesting from the ScholarScoop perspective is that you and I met during college and we weren't even going to the same school. But because of a leadership role on a state level, I was able to meet you. And it reminds me that sometimes when you're in college, you never know where you're going to intersect with people who become a part of your life journey for decades, right?
That's so true.
And so when you think back on your college experience, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you decided to choose your college, which I think is a special place that we should talk about. And then what was your general experience like while you were there?
Happy to talk about that. As you know me, Steve, yes, it has been multiple decades that we've known each other. And I just want to add a little bit to the beginning of that story as I then tell you about my choices. I remember, yes, you and I were in a state leadership role, which is where we really got to know each other. But you may recall that our first introduction was through my roommate, because you and my roommate had served together in a program. And that's how I first met you. And then we got to know each other as we were both in a leadership role in the same organization. So just
I do remember
we'll
that.
add to that is
Yes.
that your roommates are always great ways for you to meet people and connections beyond just being your roommate. So just wanted to remind you that that was the first time that we met each other.
That we won't talk about the first time we went to a comedy club together. Maybe that's for another day.
Another
Maybe
podcast
that's
story. Another
exactly.
title of a podcast for that one.
Right.
So, but I'm happy to share with you about how I chose where I was going to attend college. And I will tell you that from a very young age, I was someone who thought I knew what I wanted to do. So very early, I was a person who loved music and played the piano and took piano lessons and thought that I was going to grow up to be the first woman to run a major symphony orchestra as their conductor. So all my focus was on music and looking at music schools. Along the way, I also learned about women's colleges. So at the time that I was looking at institutions, not only was I looking for a really good music program that would teach me, had good facilities for practicing, good connections, but also, yeah, that connection part. How could I be assured that there would be ways that I could launch into a career that was a very small circle of people? In that process of figuring that out, I also came across lots of information around women's colleges and what those connections were about. I vividly remember that at that time, which was in the early 80s for me, that I saw statistics that told me that at that time in Congress, the Senate and the House, over 40% of the women that were in Congress had gone to women's colleges.
Ah, I didn't
I
know that.
also saw, yeah, it was pretty amazing. And I also noticed that in that same research, it said that women in organizations or companies that were VP or higher of that group, 45% of those women had gone to one of the women's colleges. So I thought, that gives me kind of a heads up. It gives me a little bit of an advantage because they must be very strong networks. So as I
Mhm.
was searching for colleges, those were two pretty strong variables, which of course gave me a smaller pool of schools to go visit, as I know we all have to go on campus because that makes a difference. So
Right.
in looking at those two things that were important to me, I looked at a number of women's colleges, looked at their music programs, and ended up choosing Converse College. I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. It happened to be an institution that was only 30 minutes from where I grew up. I had taken music lessons there as a high school student, so I already knew a bit about their music program firsthand.
Mhm.
And quite honestly, that was kind of a downside for me because I wanted to go away to college. I had no inclination or desire to stay at home and go to school. Actually, it turned out to be the best of both worlds. I did live on campus all 4 years. It was easy for me to go home during the middle of the week and visit with family if I wanted to. And it left me free on the weekends and holidays to go places with friends I had met at school. So I do encourage, for me, so much of my college experience was outside of the classroom. Yes, I had
Right.
amazing professors and I got the support I needed, the knowledge I wanted to acquire. I actually ended up double majoring
Mhm.
because I found some faculty members I thoroughly enjoyed. And I noticed I was gathering hours, credits in a particular area. So I ended up with a double major in religion. That's
Wow.
a great time when you're in school, and I chose a liberal arts school. I took courses across a broad spectrum. I knew there were so many things I had not had a chance to do in high school, and I just wanted to learn more about different subjects. So that's something I do encourage people to do. It made a huge difference for me in who I met on campus, who had
Mhm.
different interests that were in that class, different faculty members that became a part of my network. And it gave me a broader set of questions to determine what is it I really want to do. Of course, at that time, I still thought I wanted to pursue a music career. And yet, that ultimately wasn't where my pathway took me. And I know we might
Mhm.
talk about that a little more.
Well, I think it's a great way to frame this up because I know a lot of people go to college or explore college and they have this vision of what their life is going to turn into. And sometimes it works out that way, but you can't undervalue the experience itself. Kind of takes you in directions. Just sometimes it's serendipitous. You may meet someone, you may have a professor, or it might be someone, like you said, outside the classroom that introduces you to a whole nother way to look at things. And so what I've noticed more and more recently with companies that are hiring is it could be a company that revolves around business or business interest. And they're saying more and more that they love hiring liberal arts students because they bring a whole different way of solving problems to the table. And so when you go in there thinking, I'm going to be a conductor and I'm going to be very symphonically inclined, you've actually done that, I think, in a lot of ways with your career, which we can talk about in a few minutes, but with the idea that the way you get people together and the way that you teach them things and harmonize a lot of things going on within organizations. So you're kind of doing the symphony thing, but just in a
It
different
is
world.
connected. It is connected. Interestingly enough, I will tell you, as I came out of college, undergraduate, and I started interviewing for jobs and looking at jobs. And that's another interesting story how I ended up in my first role. I, I remember, again, I like research. So I had seen a statistic I had read that the first female VP of sales at Coca Cola
Hmm.
had a music degree.
Hmm.
So I used that little tidbit of information when I was interviewing for positions that had nothing to do with music. And because I performed, right? I was actually a music theory major. Again, not something people think they're going to use a lot, but I did have to perform. I had to be part of groups. I had to accompany people who were either playing an instrument or singing as part of my degree program. So that being in front of others was a skill that I could talk about would be very similar or analogous to sitting in front of a client explaining a product or getting past the nerves of making that phone call that I needed to do as part of the job that I was interviewing and interested in. So, whatever in a liberal arts degree that you learn, whether it's in psychology or sociology, how people behave and communication, or if you play sports, all those are pieces of behaviors and skills that have great applicability. And I agree with you, Steve. Employers today are looking for folks that have different ways to approach, to see, to reason, to solve problems, and that are willing to do things that are hard and to take risks when they're uncertain.
Right.
So music was a way that you do a lot of that, and standing in front of
Hmm.
people, hoping you remember the words to the song you're gonna sing.
Right.
It does have
Right.
applicability day to day.
Right. Yeah, I think that all makes a lot of really good sense. I will say one of the things that's interesting about your Converse experience is that you eventually found your way to serving on the board of trustees for Converse. And I think in the time that you were on the board, you had to make a big decision about whether or not the institution should start admitting men. And I love I'd love to hear a little bit about that because when you were so wedded into all of your research to decide that that was the institution for you, and then you found yourself in a leadership role for the institution, possibly having to up in the apple cart and make it a different type of experience for people. How did you work through that? And then how did that actually turn out?
Sure, that was very difficult. You're right. I specifically chose Converse for one of the main reasons being that it was a women's college. I wanted that camaraderie. I wanted that atmosphere. It was heartbreaking. I can't I can't lie. It was heartbreaking to see that that's what in a leadership role I had to realize as a trustee, I had a fiduciary responsibility. And what that means is that I was I was responsible to look at the needs and the best decisions for the institution to not only survive but to thrive.
Hmm.
And so in that role, I set aside my own personal feeling about it and looked at the market. I looked at the environment. I looked at the competition and realized that for Converse and all that it offered, when I think about my experience, the relationships, the quality of education, the friendships, I still have very strong friendships and the opportunity, to
Hmm.
meet Steve. The reason we're here today
Right.
came from that experience. And that experience needs to continue. And if the best way for that to continue was to have both young men and young women on the campus together, that's what was most important because times change. And
Yeah.
it's important to look at what the context is. So,
Hmm.
yes, it was a very difficult decision. I will say it was helped by the fact that the school did a lot of good research. They were very sensitive to and listened to the alumni. which is, of course, the female version of that
Right,
word.
right. Yep.
And now it's the alumni council, not the alumni. And they heard that that was important. So one of the things they did, or that was proposed and is in place now, is that they kept a women's college within Converse, so that if
Mhm.
someone wanted to have the pieces of that experience to look at the studies around women's studies, those types of things, live in a dorm that was only women, that was provided alongside offering what Converse so beautifully offers, and how they build students and informed parts of society. Uh, that was a key component that was kept to value some of those traditions that wouldn't easily apply to a co-ed institution. So the compromise, which is another thing that we have to think about as leaders, how do we match what the needs are in the context? But how do we also value the experiences, the needs, the desires of our stakeholders? And I was confident that in the proposal that was finally brought forward that the trustees voted on, it looked at what are those ways we can best serve? And that proposal was one I could get behind and support. Ironically, Steve, right, that same year, not in the same, I guess, bill, we didn't do it that way, but not in the same discussion. I also had to vote and support to sunset the degree that I had earned.
Mhm.
Realistically, students don't really need a music theory major. But
Mhm.
students do want and are having success with musical theater. So at the
Mhm.
same time that the Bachelor of Music and Music Theory was no longer worth being supported with resources, we did add what was important and what was being sought after by students in today's world. So it's important to understand that times change. And as leaders, sometimes we have to do things that may be uncomfortable for us, but in the role that we sit as a leader, that we are responsible to doing the thing that is in best alignment with what we're being asked to be accountable for and to lead. And so that's how I ended up being in that situation. And even today, I'm very comfortable that those were the right choices for Converse.
Well, I think in hearing all of that, it's in my mind at least lucky that Converse had you as a trustee because you brought so much perspective from being a student to where you were through your career and having the leadership experience that I think so many boards need. One of the things today, as institutions go, I think there's a lot that gets said around tradition. In every college or university, has some tradition that attaches their alumni to that experience. And whenever there's a change that needs to happen, it's usually met with a lot of
Resist.
not a lot of resistance,
Let's just
a
be
lot
honest,
of
it's resistance often.
and sometimes it's anger. It's almost like you
True.
can't let go of something that is embedded into my life experience or my journey. And I think it's also missed. And I think it's good for, high school students that are thinking about college or college students that are in the middle of it to look at the institution they attend. It's really at the core of business, right? And that's the part that I think doesn't always seem to want to be aligned or appreciated by the students that attend. And so leaders have to make hard decisions. Leaders
They
do
do.
have to think about what are our options here? Do we make this hard decision or does potentially this institution have to go out of business, which is something that I don't think anyone would like to have to endure either. And so I think that's happening. And I think you probably see it in
It
your
is.
work, these institutions. So is there any thought that you would give to students, if you're thinking about a college or you're thinking about the college that you're currently attending, does anything come to mind for you first? Like this is my checklist for today. My checklist
Okay.
back when I was looking at schools might have been this, but is there a different checklist today that you would say students should really think about when they're choosing a college or they're thinking about the college that they're currently attending?
Steve, I hadn't really thought about it in the context you just described. And
Mhm.
for me, that context is there anything different today that I would suggest, or if I were making this decision again, would I think differently than before? And I don't actually think I would think differently.
Mhm.
The solution's going to be different because institutions are different.
Right.
Eh, For me, I knew what was important and what I wanted to have as a minimum.
Hmm.
I may not look at women's colleges today, but I would look for what that offered, which is making sure that the student teacher ratio is at the level I'm comfortable with. I couldn't see myself sitting in a large lecture hall.
Hmm.
I like to engage. I like to ask questions. I like to answer questions. I'm an engaged learner, and I knew that. I went to a small public high school, and I knew I wouldn't be comfortable sitting there and never saying a word. So,
Hmm.
thinking about the environment that's comfortable for you, the way that you like to learn, I also would suggest that today you look at what is the network? What's it going to be like on campus? Are there activities? Are there facilities that I'm looking forward to that I would want to engage with? Are there things that will stretch me? Are there things
Hmm.
I haven't experienced? Is it in a community where I feel safe as far as where the location is, but also that offer pretty easy access, whether you like to travel to an airport or drive or whatever that may look like? What is the community in which I'm going to exist? And then not only is there a program that you may be interested in, but are there options to take more than just my program? Will I be able to take courses from other schools? And some larger institutions, particularly state institutions, often it's just a function of there's so many people that you end up being a little more focused in a particular school or part of campus. So thinking about what's the right size campus, because that was a big part of what was important to me. I would also say, think about, and you hear this a lot today, as far as what what is the investment that you're going to make?
Hmm.
Not just the money, not just what that looks like from a perspective of loans or grants, what that may look like with family helping, but also your time and energy. What is going
Hmm.
to be worth your investment? It is so important to remember, if possible, I would again want to live on campus. If possible, I would tell you that a good 70% of my college experience and what helped craft who I am today didn't happen in the classroom. No,
Hmm.
don't tell professors that. Those were important hours that I was in the
Right.
classroom, that I was in the practice room, that I was doing study and research. What I learned as far as how I function in life today in relationships and work and my serving on boards in fact, I teach at a university. I've had the privilege. I was teaching this Saturday for Converse in a
Hmm.
doctoral program. So all those skills that make a difference in how I get to contribute in the way that matters to me, I learned from being part of the campus community,
Hmm.
not just the degree program and not just were they going to help me get a job. Those are things
Yep.
that were important, but they haven't ultimately been the most important long
Right.
term about helping me be the person that I am today. So keep that long vision as you're looking
Yeah.
at where do I spend my 3 or 4, I hate to say maybe 5 years, but what's that impact going to be for the rest of your journey?
Yeah, no, I mean, through NSCS, we often talk about, oh, it's a lifetime membership. You know, you're becoming a part of this for a whole lifetime of your experience. And I think for a college for a freshman or second year student, you're like, what is a lifetime? You know, what am I doing tomorrow? What am I doing
Not
next week?
forever at that
Um,
time in your life. You see forever.
Right. And I do think that there is so much like opportunity through time. And I think you just don't know. And, you know, I'm right on your same page about everything that happens outside the classroom is just as much a learning experience as what's in the classroom. So that should never be missed. And just finding organizations to affiliate with has always been my thing. But let's go back really quickly. I know, you had through your career, you became super successful kind of as a corporate executive in a few different large companies, which led you to where today you're kind of highly sought after, especially by kind of, I call it the C-suite of university folks. So presidents of universities, provosts of universities, other people reporting to the president of universities like to engage you to help them be more successful in their roles and think about the priorities for institutions. What are you seeing through those conversations without disclosing anything specifically are kind of the up and coming things for colleges and universities to be thinking about as it relates to students? Do you hear student very much in those conversations, or is it more about the complicated nature of running an institution?
Steve, you have put your finger right on the pain point, that pivotal. Students, of course, are the reason. Students are the mission of an
Mm-hmm.
institution. Never is there a leader that I work with that we don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. It can be challenging. It can be challenging to keep that focus for everyone, especially
Yeah.
in very charged times when there's lots of pressures at the senior leader. You're right. I work typically with deans and provosts and CFOs and presidents, chancellors. As much as they are in this role because they typically have come from faculty members or they've come up through admissions or student services, and they came into higher ed because of wanting to serve students and the
Mm-hmm.
delivery of mission. i- there is this very difficult balancing and understanding how to deal with these daily pressures that often look from outside like they have nothing to do with students.
Mm-hmm.
Accreditation, grants, research funding, all the advocacy, parents, all these things
Yes.
that make it difficult to focus on the reason that they exist. So here's what I would offer, kind of on the university side, is don't ever forget the mission of why you're there.
Mm-hmm.
Less is more. If you can focus in on hearing not only your students, but your faculty and your staff and your alumni and your parents and all those constituencies that are why you exist, often they're more forgiving if they are heard and attended to and they can understand no or not now, or
Mm-hmm.
finances and resources just aren't allowing us to do everything that you would like,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they know that they're being heard and attended to. For students and parents, I would say also pay attention that many of the forces driving that delicate balance between, oh, we want the best experience to be on campus in our 4 years or to attend a campus. Be conscious that all of those things in that experience take resources. So, in balancing the cost, the investment you need to make, and your expectations, I highly encourage you to think about what is most important. And I've yet to find in all my years of working with campuses
Mm-hmm.
a money tree growing on the campus. If I do find one, I will be selling those to other campuses. I might just give them away at this point. Because those don't exist, be conscious that any delivery of mission takes an investment: time, energy, personnel, and then dollars. So
Yep.
finding that balance between what can we do to create uh, contributing citizens, leaders through our institutions, and as you're finding the right place for you, what is it that is important to you, and how can you be a contribution to that institution and how they're delivering mission as they go forward?
I think that's really a lot for everyone should think about it in those terms. I also tell students pretty often like that you should humanize the leaders of your institutions because they're making
Absolutely.
hard decisions. Like we talked about this, it's hard decisions being made and a lot of factors go into making those decisions that you maybe aren't always privy to. But I remember as an undergrad, um, kind of a lot similar to you. I know we've talked about this. Like I got really involved as an undergrad differently than I was in high school. And I made it a priority to meet the people that were leading the institution. And so, and
Very nice.
through friends that I met, one of my really good friends in college, it just so happened her father happened to be on the board of trustees, which was a unexpected way to have access to the president of the university. So getting to know the president, and I and the president was always surprising in the sense what he would say things like, I don't really get to talk to students that often, and I always appreciate when they come up and introduce themselves or they say hi to me. And I think some students feel this like, it's the president, or even who is the president if it's a large institution.
Right.
So I really do think if you look at maybe making a small checklist for when you become a student, find an angle where you can get
Yes.
yourself into the room with the president, with the provost, with the vice president of student affairs or academic affairs or your dean, because you might find that getting to know them opens a lot of other doors that you wouldn't have expected. So
I
that's just a
agree.
little add on to what you were just saying, because I think it's just
Yeah,
something students don't think about doing when they get to their college experience.
totally agree. And Steve, you hit a very important point. Learning is a two-way street.
Yep.
Being a leader takes accountability, and being a leader takes being proactive and intentional. And so, what you just suggested, and as you talk about and share, I remember you were that kind of student. You began to put those kinds of skills in practice. And I do encourage that other people do that as well. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret about higher ed leaders.
Mm-hmm. I'm ready.
I have yet to find, and I'm happy to be wrong, I've yet to find a doctoral program for any of these folks that, a master's or a terminal master's or a doctoral program that teaches people to be a leader. So all these higher ed leaders may be brilliant scholars in Russian literature or physics, but they haven't had the training on a regular basis to be in the roles they're in. So give them a little grace. They've
Right.
been willing to step into some really hard uh, leadership roles. And as a president of the university, it is very rare, unless someone is an accounting professor or a finance professor, they deal with budgets in the millions of dollars.
Right.
They don't have a business degree. And yet they take on these, culture, take on these areas that are nothing to do with what they were trained to do as they became a faculty member.
Yep.
So that's the little secret, which is why I, over my career, have focused for many years in supporting higher ed leaders because they have an enviable job. I commend them for wanting to step into the roles they do, yet over time, the environments have not prepared them as well as they could have for
Mm-hmm.
pure leadership. So you all have the opportunity to be a part of not only learning yourself, but finding ways to add to the leadership role within your campus. And one last piece I'll mention that I'm going to leave a little assignment for you. Steve and
Mm-hmm.
I might talk about this in another podcast. One of the other things that is so different about higher ed than any other position you're going to be in, wherever you work, is that they employ what's called shared governance
Mm-hmm.
that only exists in higher ed. And quickly, that is having all people involved, almost like a democracy,
Mm-hmm.
involved in decision making. And that makes it a unique environment that people are just not prepared for. So look up shared governance. So as you go into college, as you're in college, and you wonder about some of these decisions between the board and the president
Yep.
and the faculty and students, it'll give you some insight how that functions a bit differently than any other place that you're going to be, but you can learn from that experience.
Yeah, and I think for students who go through their college experience and then decide, I think I want to work on a campus, or I want to be a faculty member, or maybe I want to be a college president someday, which is probably not the role someone, you started out wanting to be a symphony, orchestra conductor. I don't think a lot of people go to college thinking, I want to be a college president. I think it
But there are
happens
some.
through, there are some for sure. And I think a lot of it comes through maybe your campus experience, your college experience, or maybe even the chance to interact, because I certainly remember the college president when I was there, and he was a part of my decision to want to be more of a university administrator and a student development person. He was one of the many people that contributed to that. I know we're about out of time, but I just have one more quick thing that, like you just said, could be another whole podcast for us. But one of the things that you've done on occasion, on and off, I know, is you work with Deloitte sometimes on their Deloitte University program, which is an intern program for summer associates and folks that are getting trained to learn a lot of skills that will be helpful to them if they choose to go work in kind of a consulting arena like Deloitte. What are the skills that you teach, or what are the skills that college students today or high school students should be thinking about that you would put at the top of that list for being prepared for the workforce or to be a good contributor to a new place of employment?
That's yes, that could be a series of podcasts. Yes, you're
Fine.
correct. Had the opportunity to work with interns within Deloitte. Deloitte is a company that does invest in its people at all levels in their own university internally, which is
Yeah.
where I have had the opportunity to work across the organization and globally with the interns. And as they not only provide opportunities for interns, but then hire a large number of those people, what they're looking for and they develop during that intern process are a number of things, but I want to point out just two of them. Really importantly, it's about communication.
Mhm.
It's about the ability to not only ask good questions, to really listen to what people say and don't say, to understand body language, to take that information and then be able to problem solve. It's also the other way. It's how do you professionally communicate? How are you able to explain to people that may not technically understand? How do you help make things calm and productive as you're working with a team? Because everything at Deloitte is done in teams. Sometimes it's a few people, sometimes it's a massive number of people, depending on the account. So, communication in both directions, receiving it and giving it, critically important. The
Mhm.
piece I mentioned, connection, was taking that information and coming up with an answer or options and solutions. So the ability to look at data, to ask good questions, such a skill that most people don't focus on, is asking quality questions and then being able to have a discussion with innovative ideas, looking at all sides and being open to what you either aren't aware of or what you may have a bias towards, and being open in that problem solving and innovation. So those are a couple that stand
Yep.
at the top of the list.
No, that's really helpful. And I think what is important is to always continue to keep building a list of things for students to be mindful of so they can be as prepared as possible for interviews, having those conversations, and then getting into their first role. Well, thank you so much, Julie. I
Oh,
would
it's
love to have this conversation continue with so many other aspects of what you've accomplished. I will also say I want to let you know how much I've always appreciated your supporting me and NSCS. And I know you
a pleasure.
selectively choose boards to serve on, and the fact that you've served on the NSCS board now for more than 5 years, including our current board chair. It's definitely appreciated, and the students and the lifetime members are lucky to have you involved in your leadership. So thank you so much for that and for giving us a lot of scholar scoop to chew on.
Excellent. It's been my pleasure and is my pleasure. So thank you, Steve, for having me as your guest on the podcast.